Okay, so now we're moving into, still related to ethics, but we're moving away from these questions of meta-ethics that we talked about, the Euthyphro dilemma, which is this question of where do ethical principles come from? What is ethics about? And now we're moving into these questions about actual ethical theories. What makes certain things right or wrong? How can we decide if something's right or wrong? And we're going to frame this around the topic of justice. So we're going to say, like, okay, the point of ethics is to get justice, to get fairness, to somehow distribute the fairness and justice to people. So how do we do that? And we're going to look at some different views on what it means for something to be good or just. So utilitarianism is the view, it's a consequentialist theory of ethics. So consequentialism holds that when we're arguing about whether something is ethical or not, we're looking at just the consequence, the outcome of the action, choice, policy, or so forth. So we need to figure out what makes an outcome good or bad. So we say, okay, this action is good based on it having a good outcome. We need to have some way to define what a good outcome is. Now we're going to talk first about Jeremy Bentham's version of utilitarianism. I'm going to give you guys a little bit about Jeremy Bentham. You guys know me. I'm going to tell you about these views, or you should know me at this point. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the people that hold these views. So Jeremy Bentham, he first posits this view called utilitarianism, and he has a couple of other views. So he's this panopticon. If you don't know what a panopticon is, this is the panopticon at Statesville, the Illinois State Prison in Statesville, Illinois. This is actually the sort of design that's at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary as well. You have a guard tower in the center of a circular room, and the idea is that the guards can see into all of the cells at any given moment. You don't have to hear them coming. They have a 360 view. And Jeremy Bentham, he's the one that proposed this sort of prison design. And he's alive during the early 1800s. And he argues that you don't actually need somebody in this tower. The prisoners will act as if they're always being watched because they don't know if they're being watched. There's a really good horror book, by the way, called Horror Store by Grady Hendrix that is really good, and it's based partially around this concept of a panopticon. And he thought that this would be like the most beneficial prison design because you would never need a guard, right? There's no interaction between the guards and the prisoners, makes it better. The prisoners will always act as if they're being watched. Jeremy Bentham was a weird dude. It's the real takeaway here. And I'm going to tell you more about Jeremy Bentham. This is his auto icon. Jeremy Bentham, when he died, he wanted to be preserved, not taxidermy per se, but a similar process. He wanted his body preserved, and then he donated it to the college he worked at, College of London, and they had to bring him to every philosophy department discussion or meeting. These used to be held weekly. Now they're not held weekly. So this is his auto icon right here. If you look here, you can see his head. Something went wrong when his head was preserved, and it looks really weird. And so this is a wax head, but these are his actual clothes and his actual body. The head was actually stolen at one point, but they still bring this guy out to the faculty meetings because he left a lot of money. And this is his head. As you could tell, it got all wrinkly and leathery. Something went wrong in the process to preserve his head. And this head has been stolen at least once. He also had these things called mourning rings created. We might think of them as Horcruxes. These are engraved with the names of the people he made them for, and he had his hair built into the ring, and he gave them the 13 people, or 26, 26. Most of them had hair in them, as you can look down here. He had them sized to his friends. So he has a friend who's a blacksmith, got a very large ring. Some of these have been bought at auction. We don't know where all of them are. This is a really weird thing to do. I don't know how you cut this so it's not a strange thing, but if you know that you're going to die soon, maybe you're elderly, maybe you have an illness or something like that, go ahead and have some mourning rings with your hair made into them for your friends. But these actually sell for an absurd amount of money, considering Jeremy Bentham is just a philosopher. He's not really a particularly famous philosopher. In the history of England, he's pretty popular. He came up with a lot of ideas that were implemented, for instance, the Panopticon. But $150,000 for this is just really strange. But let's talk about his utilitarianism, because I want you to keep in mind, he lived the way that he did as a utilitarian. So all of his ideas are informed by this ethical theory that he had. So it's the view that what's ethical is the thing that maximizes pleasure and minimizes pain, right? So remember, this is about outcomes. It's about what the action, policy, rule, what it leads to. It's what it creates as an outcome. So we know that it maximizes pleasure and minimizes pain. It's good, according to Bentham, right? Why do we know this? Or why does he think this, right? So he says that we don't really know what's going on with rights. We don't really know what's going on with the rules, but we do know that when we look at humans, we can see when they're suffering, we can see when they're not suffering, and we ourselves know when we're not suffering, and we know when we are suffering, right? These are objective things, right? Whether or not something brings us pleasure is subjective, but whether or not we are in pain or not in pain, that is objective. That's something we all experience. And he means this quite literally. A calculus. Choice is good if pleasure is greater than pain, and he calls this the hedonic calculus. So he poses these things called hedons. Modern philosophers sometimes call them utils. He says if a pleasure can be described as a unit, and he thinks it can in hedons, and you're choosing between x or y, if x gives you 5 utils and y gives you 4 utils, you should choose which action should you choose? Well, it's just a simple mathematical equation, right? You should choose x, because x gives you more utils or hedons. So that's simple for him. But then we have to think about what gives us pleasure, right? So like, it doesn't really matter what the pleasure is, but the thing you're talking about is, if it gives you more pleasure, right, you should do that. But choices are radically different, right? So you could choose to go to the OU game or visit your grandmother, or you could choose to set yourself on fire, right? These are wildly different choices, right? If just your happiness matters, then the choice doesn't matter. The content of the choice. Only whether the choice makes you happy. So here, the choice you should make is go to the OU game because it makes you happier than if you visit your grandma, right? We shouldn't set yourself on fire because that decreases your pleasure by a lot. It's a close game, not too close between visiting your grandma, going to the OU game. You should go to the OU game, and you shouldn't set yourself on fire. That's the sort of calculus that Bentham is making. This is called egoism, ethical egoism, and Bentham rejects it, right? Shouldn't your grandmother, like how she feels, matter? Bentham says yes. He's weird, but he's not a donkey. He rejects egoism. He says everyone's happiness matters just the same amount, so you have to take in the global pleasure and pain outcomes of your decision, right? So we can do some math here, right? You go to the OU game, it gives you 95. Your grandma's happy that you're going to the OU game, so you get 30. If you visit grandma, you're going to be happier by 75 utils, and your grandma's going to be happier by 100 utils. You set yourself on fire, you're going to be really unhappy. Your grandma's only going to be like -2 utils unhappy, right? That's not she knows you're doing this math. She's not very happy about it. So obviously you should, on Bentham's view, you should visit your grandma. 175 is in fact greater than 125. This isn't an option, right? Because it causes a decrease in utils. It causes pain. The weird outcome of this is that all pleasures are equally valid. Think about the content of the choices here. Go to the OU game versus visiting your grandma. Those are pretty banal examples. But if you recall, you guys don't have this example yet, but the sheriff case, where he's choosing, so this case is a very famous one where a sheriff he's got a guy named Bob who's accused of murdering somebody in the town. It's a very small town. The sheriff doesn't have a good reason to think Bob's guilty. In fact, maybe he has exculpatory evidence, evidence that Bob is not guilty. And the townsfolk say, like, look, if you don't arrest Bob, we're going to riot. We're going to destroy the city or the town, and several people might even die or be hurt. Well, on utilitarianism, the sheriff should arrest Bob. Why? Because even though it makes Bob unhappy, you have to take in the global outcome of the choice, and everybody in the town's happiness, their utils, outweigh Bob's. So even though Bob is worse off, everybody else is better off. So this choice, sheriff arresting the Bob even though he knows he's innocent, is the same as visiting your grandma or going to OU in terms of pleasure. Like, all pleasures are equally same. Avoiding being murdered in a riot, same pleasure, same equally valid pleasure as the sort of pleasure you get when you go to an OU game or visit your grandma. So we might think that's strange. You might even think here that going to the OU game or visiting your grandma or setting yourself on fire, that these are radically different choices, right? But Bentham says no, all pleasure is the same. So these are the key takeaways. Everyone's happiness matters just the same amount. You have to calculate the global pleasure and pain outcomes of your decision, right? So this is how we decide if it's good. All pleasures are equally valid, so you can't say, oh, the type of choice you're making matters. Nope, it's just the amount of pleasure as an outcome. That's the consequence here, right? Setting yourself on fire, going to the OU game, and visiting your grandma are all the same type of choices. So all pleasure, from rolling around in the dirt like a pig, to caring for a loved one, to eating, to doing meth, and so forth, they're all the same. This is a view called hedonism. Although you can argue that Bentham is not a hedonist, but nevertheless, all pleasure is the same, and pleasure is how we tell whether or not a choice is good. Right? On Bentham's utilitarianism, an action is good if it increases net global pleasure and decreases net global pain.